It was a warm summer evening when Daniel decided to take a walk along Shoreline Cove. The sun had just dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the sand. The beach was nearly empty, save for the occasional distant jogger or dog walker. The air smelled of salt and something else, something faintly metallic. But Daniel ignored it. The ocean always smelled a little strange at night. As he walked, something unusual caught his eye. A single line of deep, perfectly spaced footprints in the damp sand, leading directly into the water. He paused, tilting his head. Strange. There was no one in sight. The tide was low, and the waves were lazy, barely reaching the shore. If someone had gone for a swim, they should still be visible, right? Or, at the very least, there should have been footprints returning from the water. But there weren't. Daniel felt a chill run down his spine. He looked around. Nothing. No signs of struggle, no abandoned clothes or shoes, no evidence that anyone had even been there at all, except for those footprints. The deeper he stared at them, the more unsettling they became. They were fresh, too fresh, almost as if the person had disappeared seconds before he arrived. The thought sent an uneasy twinge through his stomach, but he shook it off. Maybe someone had simply waded in and swum away. He forced himself to keep walking, but the feeling lingered. And then he noticed something else. The footprints weren't normal. They were slightly elongated, the arches too high, the toes too deep in the sand, as if whoever left them wasn't walking quite right. Almost like they had been pulled. A cold wind blew in from the water, and for the first time that night, Daniel felt truly alone. He turned, glancing back toward the boardwalk. A couple was strolling in the distance, their laughter carrying faintly over the waves. Good. Other people were nearby. He wasn't losing it. Shaking his head, he continued walking, putting the footprints behind him. Or so he thought. It wasn't until the next night that Daniel saw them again. He wasn't planning to return to the beach. He had no reason to. But something gnawed at him all day. A strange, irrational need to check if the footprints were still there. Maybe they'd been washed away by the tide, or maybe they'd been nothing at all. Just a trick of his imagination. But they weren't gone. They were back. Exactly the same. The same perfect line leading into the ocean. No footprints leading out. Only this time, there were more. A second set, parallel to the first, but smaller, lighter. Like a child's. Daniel's stomach turned. The wind picked up, howling through the dunes. He could swear he heard whispers carried on the breeze, soft, pleading. He scanned the water, expecting to see someone wading in the waves, but there was nothing. Just endless blackness stretching beyond the shore. Something was very wrong. He pulled out his phone and snapped a picture. He wasn't sure why. Maybe to prove he wasn't crazy. Maybe to show someone later, in case something happened to him. He turned to leave, and then he heard it. The sound of footsteps, right behind him. He spun around, heart pounding. But the beach was empty. Just the dark, rippling waves and the wind tearing across the sand. His phone buzzed. A notification. He looked down at the screen, breath hitching in his throat. The picture he had taken, the footprints were gone. What happened on that beach? Were the footprints just an eerie coincidence? Or something far more sinister? There are countless tales of people vanishing near the water, their disappearances unexplained. Some believe the ocean itself has an appetite, that it takes what it wants, leaving no trace. Others claim there are things beneath the waves, things that lure people in, dragging them down where no one can hear them scream. One chilling theory suggests that these footprints could belong to victims of the past, people lost to the sea, trying to return. But something won't let them. They're trapped, forever repeating their last moments, their silent cries echoing in the wind. Or worse, maybe they aren't trying to escape. Maybe they're trying to bring someone with them. The ocean is vast, endless, and unforgiving. It has seen more death than we can fathom. And sometimes, if you listen closely, it whispers. So the next time you find yourself alone on the shore, and you see a trail of footprints leading into the waves with none coming back, ask yourself, who left them? And are they still waiting for you? Good night, and sleep well. It started as a spontaneous adventure. For friends, Mia, Daniel, Alex, and Jess, had spent the day exploring the coastline near their rented beach house. The weather was perfect, clear skies, warm sand, and the rhythmic crashing of waves. Then, just before sunset, they saw it. A decaying shipwreck, half buried in the wet sand, its jagged remains jutting out like bones against the blood-red horizon. The sight of it was eerie, yet hypnotic. The wreck had been there for decades, and locals claimed it was cursed. Something about it felt wrong, as if it didn't belong to this world anymore. Daniel, always the thrill-seeker, was the first to suggest exploring it. "It's just some old wood and rusted metal," he said, dismissing the creeping unease in Mia's gut. "Besides, it'll be cool to see up close." Despite their instincts telling them otherwise, the group waded through the knee-high water, reaching the ship just as the last light of day began to fade. They didn't notice how quickly the tide had started to change. Inside, the wreck smelled of salt and decay. The wooden planks creaked beneath their weight, shifting like the ribcage of a sleeping beast. Rusted chains dangled from the ceiling, swaying ever so slightly despite the absence of wind. Then, the first whisper came. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like a breath carried on the tide. Mia whipped around, scanning the empty hallways of the ruined vessel. "Did you hear that?" she asked, her voice hushed. Alex chuckled nervously. "It's probably just the wind through the cracks." But there was no wind. Jess, who had been examining a rusted plaque on the wall, shivered. "Maybe we should go," she whispered. "This place is—" Another whisper, closer this time. A single word, "stay." Panic set in. The group rushed toward the exit, but the moment they stepped outside, their breath caught in their throats. The tide had risen. The once visible pathway of sand leading back to shore was now completely submerged beneath dark, churning water. "That's not possible," Daniel muttered, his voice strained. "It wasn't even that height 5 minutes ago." They were trapped. Heartbeats pounded in their ears as they scrambled to higher ground, moving deeper into the ship. But the deeper they went, the louder the whispers became. The ship groaned as if it were alive, the walls closing in, the shadows stretching impossibly long. The air grew thick, damp, suffocating. Then, in the dim light, Mia saw it. A figure standing in the corridor ahead. Not quite human. Not quite there. Its form flickered like a mirage, as if it were trapped between worlds, its mouth moving soundlessly, except for the whispers that now surrounded them. A chorus of disembodied voices, speaking in overlapping tongues. "Join us. Stay with us. The tide never leaves." And then something grabbed Mia's wrist. Mia screamed, jerking away just in time to see a skeletal, seaweed-covered hand retreat into the darkness. They ran, blindly navigating through the twisting remains of the ship, their bodies trembling with adrenaline. The walls around them seemed to shift, closing in. The tide was now surging inside the wreck, rising rapidly, faster than nature should allow. If they didn't escape, they would drown. Just as hope began to slip away, Alex spotted a rusted ladder leading up to what remained of the upper deck. One by one, they climbed, clawing their way toward the sliver of moonlight above. Jess was the last to reach the top, but as she pulled herself up, something yanked her ankle, dragging her back. Her scream was swallowed by the water. In that moment, Mia acted on pure instinct. She lunged forward, grabbing Jess's arm and pulling with all her strength. For a second, it felt like Jess was being ripped in two. But then, with one final heave, she broke free. They collapsed onto the deck, gasping for breath. The whispers were now a deafening roar. And then, silence. By some miracle, the tide began to recede. As the first light of dawn touched the rusted shipwreck, the whispers faded, retreating into the depths. The four friends made it back to shore, exhausted, soaked, and forever changed. But there was one final horror waiting for them. As they looked back at the shipwreck, the shadowy figure stood on the deck, watching them. And then it raised a hand in a slow, deliberate wave. Some say the shipwreck was cursed, that it claimed the souls of those who drowned inside. Others believe it was simply a cruel trick of the sea. But one thing is certain, the ocean never forgets, and neither do the ones who listen to its whispers. Some places are not meant to be disturbed. Some voices should never be heard. The next time you see an abandoned wreck resting on the shore, ask yourself, is it really empty? Or is something inside waiting for you to listen? Until next time, keep your lights on and don't listen too closely to the whispers of the sea. It began on an overcast afternoon. Mark was visiting the beach alone, hoping for some solitude. He had always been drawn to the ocean, its endless expanse, its calming waves. But that day, the sea seemed different. The air was still, the water unnaturally silent. As he walked along the shore, his foot struck something hard, something half buried in the wet sand. A glass bottle. It was old, crusted with salt, its surface clouded by time. Inside, barely visible through the fog glass, was a note. Mark hesitated before picking it up. It was the kind of thing you'd expect to find in a ghost story. But curiosity got the better of him. He pried out the brittle paper, unfolding it carefully. The ink was faded, the words almost illegible. But as he squinted, his breath caught in his throat. It was a plea for help, a desperate, frantic scrawl. But that wasn't the worst part. The handwriting was his own. Mark felt his pulse quicken. He had never written this letter. He had never thrown a bottle into the ocean. And yet, every loop, every line of ink was undeniably his. The message was brief, just a few frantic sentences. Please, if you find this, don't go near the cliffs. Don't let it follow you. It knows. It watches. You can't escape it. The words sent a chill down his spine. He looked around, suddenly feeling exposed. The beach was empty, yet the sense of being watched was overwhelming. Had someone played a trick on him? Had he written this in some forgotten past and thrown it into the waves? But why would he warn himself? And warn himself of what? Then he noticed something else. The date scribbled at the bottom of the letter. It was tomorrow's date. Mark's thoughts spiraled. Was this some elaborate prank? Or is it something worse? He tried to shake the unease, telling himself it had to be a coincidence. And yet, deep down, he knew better. That night, he barely slept. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the words scrawled across the paper. The ink seemed burned into his mind. As morning came, he told himself it was just paranoia. He'd avoid the cliffs, just in case. But as the day stretched on, an inexplicable pull guided him back to the beach. He couldn't ignore the feeling, like an unseen force was drawing him there. And then he saw them, the footprints, leading from the shore, heading toward the cliffs. Fresh, recent, his own. Mark's heart pounded. He hadn't been here today. He hadn't walked this path. And yet, there were his own footprints deep in the damp sand, leading to the very place he was warned to avoid. The cliffs loomed ahead, jagged and dark against the sky. The closer he got, the stronger the sense of dread became, pressing against his chest like an invisible weight. Then he saw something else. Another bottle, resting at the cliff's edge, as if placed there deliberately. He picked it up with shaking hands. The note inside was fresh, the ink still wet. With a deep breath, he unfolded the paper. It's too late. It already knows you're here. And then, the whisper, soft just behind him, close enough that he felt the breath on his neck. You were never supposed to open it. Mark never should have opened that bottle. Never should have read the words meant to warn him. Because now, the warning had come true. The beach remained silent. The cliffs stood as they always had. The waves lapped at the shore, indifferent. But Mark was gone. A week later, another bottle washed ashore. Inside, a new note, desperate, urgent. The ink still drying. It was written in someone else's handwriting. What really happened to Mark? Was it a message from the future, a cruel loop of time, sealing his fate? Or was there something else at play? Something ancient, something lurking beneath the waves, waiting for someone to make the same mistake? Perhaps some messages were never meant to be read. Some warnings should never be ignored. And if you ever find a bottle washed ashore, ask yourself, was it meant for you? It was a hot July afternoon when 10-year-old Danny and his parents arrived at Clearwater Beach. It was a perfect day until it wasn't. Danny, an eager swimmer but inexperienced, waded out farther than he realized. Before he knew it, the shore was slipping away from him. The current had him, Panic set in. His small arms flailed, legs kicked in futility. The beach, once so close, was now an unreachable dream. He screamed, but the waves swallowed his voice. And then, arms. Strong, steady arms pulled him from the water. A lifeguard, no older than his late teens, dragged him back to shore. His face was striking, sandy blonde hair, a red lifeguard tank, piercing blue eyes that seemed old. "You're okay now, kid," he said, patting Danny's shoulder. Danny collapsed onto the sand, gasping for air. By the time he looked up, his savior was gone. Not walking away, not blending into the crowd, just gone. When his parents arrived, frantic and breathless, Danny told them about the lifeguard. But when they approached the lifeguard station, they were met with confusion. "We don't have any male lifeguards on duty today," they were told, and no one saw a rescue. Danny's experience is far from unique. Over the years, multiple beachgoers, some drowning, others caught in rip currents, have reported a lifeguard matching the same description, always appearing out of nowhere, always disappearing without a trace. Could this be the spirit of a lifeguard who drowned on duty? A phantom eternally watching over the ocean, saving those who fall victim to the same fate he once suffered? But what if this entity isn't just saving people? What if it's warning them? In 1998, a woman named Evelyn visited the same beach with her friends. As they settled near the shore, she saw him, a young lifeguard, standing at the edge of the water, staring at her. His lips moved, but no sound came out. She felt uneasy. His gaze was intense, as if pleading with her to listen. She turned away for just a moment, and when she looked back, he was gone. That was enough for her. She convinced her friends to pack up and leave early, much to their annoyance. That night, a freak storm hit the beach, unexpected, violent. A waterspout tore through the exact area they had been sitting in just hours before. Had the lifeguard been warning her? Evelyn's story suggests something different. If the entity isn't just rescuing, but also forewarning, does that mean it knows when disaster is about to strike? Or worse, is it connected to these disasters in ways we can't understand? In 2015, a man named Mark was vacationing with his wife and daughter. One evening, as the sun set, he scrolled through his phone, looking at the pictures he'd taken that day. And that's when he saw it. In the background of one of their beach photos, standing near the shore, was a young lifeguard. The same sandy hair, piercing blue eyes, and red tank top that so many had described. The problem? Mark knew for a fact that no lifeguards were present at that time. Curious, he asked around. The locals hesitated before one finally spoke. "Sounds like you saw Jamie." "Jamie?" Mark asked. The old man nodded. "Jamie was a lifeguard here, years ago, drowned trying to save a kid. Poor boy didn't make it either." Mark's blood ran cold. He turned back to his phone, staring at the spectral figure in his photo. If Jamie was long dead, who, or what, had been watching them that day? There are many theories about the lifeguard who wasn't there. Some believe he's a residual haunting, a spirit stuck in a loop, endlessly repeating his last moments of duty. Others claim he's a guardian, a force of good, protecting swimmers from the dangers of the sea. But then there are the darker theories. What if this entity isn't just saving lives, but choosing who lives and who drowns? What if he appears not out of kindness, but as part of something far more chilling? We may never know for sure. But next time you're at the beach, keep an eye out. Because if you ever find yourself struggling in the waves and someone pulls you to safety, make sure they leave footprints in the sand. It started as a night of adventure. 5 friends, Sarah, Jake, Mia, Tyler, and Brandon, had been camping near a secluded beach along the Pacific coast. The kind of place that didn't have lifeguards or tourists. Just miles of untouched shoreline, surrounded by towering cliffs and dense, whispering trees. They had spent the evening telling ghost stories around a bonfire, the crackling flames casting eerie shadows across the sand. The night air was warm, and the water, darker than ink, called to them like a dare. "Let's go for a swim," Jake suggested, grinning. "Just a quick one. The moon's out. It'll be fun." The others hesitated at first, but the thrill of the unknown was too tempting to resist. So one by one, they waded into the water, the cold sting sending shivers up their spines. At first, everything was fine. The waves rolled gently, and the moonlight glowed against the water surface. They splashed and laughed, the sound of their voices carrying over the silence of the empty beach. Then, Mia felt something brush against her leg. She gasped and spun around. "Did you feel that?" Tyler chuckled. "Probably just seaweed." But a second later, Sarah screamed. Not the playful, startled kind of scream. The kind that makes your blood run cold. She scrambled backward, splashing wildly, her face twisted in horror. "Eyes! There are eyes in the water!" For a moment, they thought she was joking. But then they saw it. Just below the surface, barely visible in the black water, dozens of glowing eyes. Motionless, watching. Then they moved. Something massive stirred beneath them, shifting the water unnaturally. The glow of the eyes rippled as if the creatures were circling them. Panic took over. They raced toward the shore, arms thrashing, feet kicking desperately against the unseen depths below. Jake was the fastest, reaching the shallows first. He turned, shouting for the others to hurry. But in that instant, Brandon vanished. He had been right there, but now there was only empty water. "Brandon!" Sarah screamed. No answer, just the rhythmic pull of the tide. They didn't stop. They couldn't. The moment they hit the shore, they collapsed onto the sand, choking on fear, gasping for breath. They stared at the waves, waiting, hoping to see Brandon resurface. But he never did. The glowing eyes lingered just beyond the break, as if whatever was down there was deciding whether to come closer. Then, slowly, one by one, they sank into the abyss. The next morning, search teams combed the water. There was no sign of Brandon. No body. No clues. Just the endless ocean stretching toward the horizon, indifferent and silent. So what did they see? What took Brandon? Some believe it could have been bioluminescent creatures, an eerie yet natural phenomenon. Certain deep-sea fish, jellyfish, and plankton can create an unearthly glow, sometimes mistaken for supernatural entities. But here's the problem. Bioluminescent creatures don't drag people under. Others whisper of oceanic cryptids, unknown creatures lurking in the deep. Some cultures speak of water spirits or sea demons, ancient beings that claim those who trespass into their domain after dark. Then there's the possibility of something more psychological, a mass hallucination caused by fear and adrenaline. The mind plays tricks when faced with the unknown, filling in the blanks with the worst possible scenario. But does that explain Brandon's disappearance? Does that explain why, to this day, his body was never found? Months later, a fisherman miles down the coast found something disturbing. A single diving mask, covered in barnacles, washed ashore. Inside the glass, there were scratches. Deep, erratic scratches like fingernails scraping against the inside. Authorities dismissed it. They said it could belong to anyone. But the campers, they knew the truth. The ocean doesn't give back what it takes. So the next time you find yourself standing on the shore at night, staring into the endless black water, ask yourself this: do you really know what's beneath you? Or are you being watched? The storm had raged for hours, waves hammering the coastline with an unrelenting fury. By morning, the beach was unrecognizable, debris strewn across the sand, seaweed tangled in fence posts, and objects that had no business being there. Among them was an old metal chest, half buried in the wet sand. It was spotted by a man named Daniel, a local who often walked the shore after storms, searching for washed-up oddities. But this was unlike anything he had ever found. The chest was solid iron, covered in patches of rust, its surface marked with strange, intricate engravings. Yet, what struck him most was the sound. A soft, rhythmic ticking coming from inside. At first, he assumed it was a clock or some kind of old maritime instrument. But the chest was locked. No hinges, no keyhole. Just a relentless, steady tick-tick-tick from within. Curiosity got the best of him. Against better judgment, he lugged the chest back to his house, unaware that this single decision would unravel his reality. Daniel placed the chest in his living room and examined it further. The engravings, now seen in proper light, weren't just random scratches. They looked almost like symbols, carved with precise intent. Some resembled ancient runes, others unfamiliar shapes that made his skin crawl. The ticking never stopped. It didn't slow. It didn't speed up. It remained steady, unchanging, almost mechanical, yet off. That night, Daniel barely slept. The sound followed him. Even with the chest locked away in the basement, the rhythmic clicking burrowed into his mind. It felt closer, louder. By the second night, it wasn't just the sound. The house itself seemed wrong. Lights flickered. Clocks stopped working, as if the ticking had stolen their time. Shadows in the corners of his vision seemed to linger longer than they should. Something was inside that chest, and it wanted out. Desperation led Daniel to an old locksmith in town, a man who had dealt with antique safes and forgotten mechanisms. When a locksmith saw the chest, he refused to touch it. "I've seen something like this before," the old man muttered. It didn't end well, but Daniel was persistent. He brought the chest to his garage and pried at it with a crowbar. It took hours, the metal resisting as if it didn't want to be opened. But finally, with a sickening snap, the lid gave way. Inside, there was no clock, no gears, no mechanisms of any kind, just something wrapped in decayed fabric. It looked like a bundle of old rags, brittle and yellowed with time. And yet, the ticking continued. Daniel reached in, trembling. The fabric was damp, ice cold despite the summer air. As he unraveled it, his stomach twisted in revulsion. Inside was something small, shriveled, and blackened, a thing that once might have been alive. A heart, leathery and mummified, and it was beating. The ticking was not mechanical. It was pulsing. The moment he exposed it to the air, the sound changed. It was no longer a tick. It was a thump. His vision blurred. A wave of nausea crashed over him as a whisper, low and guttural, filled the garage. It wasn't coming from the heart. It was coming from inside his own head. You were not supposed to open it. The lights in the garage flickered out. The room plunged into darkness, save for the dim glow of Daniel's flashlight shaking in his hand. The heartbeat grew louder, filling the space, suffocating him with its rhythm. He wanted to drop it, to run, to throw the chest back into the sea, but his body refused to move. Then, the whisper returned. Time has been restored. And just like that, the heart stopped. The ticking ceased. The silence was deafening. When Daniel's vision cleared, the chest was empty. The bundle was gone. Only the open, rusted box remained. He staggered back, gasping for air. Had he imagined it? Had the stress, the lack of sleep, played tricks on him? But deep down, he knew the truth. Something had been waiting inside that chest. And now, it was free. Daniel never spoke about what happened. He never told another soul what he had seen. But things changed after that night. His clocks still refused to work. His house still carried a sense of unease. And sometimes, when the world was silent, he swore he could hear it. A faint, distant ticking growing closer. What was the chest? A relic of an ancient curse? A vessel for something not meant to exist in our world? Or perhaps to prison? One thing is certain, some things wash ashore for a reason. And some doors, once opened, can never be shut. Stories like Daniel's serve as chilling reminders of the unknown. The ocean has depths beyond our understanding, both in water and in mystery. Who knows what else lies waiting beneath the waves, ticking away, waiting for someone to find it. Next time you walk the shore after a storm, be careful what you pick up, because some things should remain lost. The traveler's name was David. He wasn't a thrill seeker, nor did he believe in ghost stories. He simply wanted to get away for a while, to find solace in solitude. The drive down the coastline was long and winding, with towering cliffs on one side and an endless expanse of deep blue on the other. His map marked no towns along this stretch, only the occasional rest stop or scenic lookout. But as he rounded a bend, he spotted something unusual, a small road leading down to what appeared to be a coastal village. The sign at the turnoff was old and weathered, the letters barely legible, Saline Bay. He had never heard of it before. Curiosity got the better of him. Saline Bay was picturesque, almost too perfect. The streets were lined with charming, pastel-colored cottages. The air smelled of salt and sun-warmed sand. Shops displayed handcrafted trinkets in their windows, and people walked about, smiling, greeting him as if he belonged. A town frozen in time, untouched by modern tourism. David stopped at a small cafe near the shore, where an elderly woman served him a cup of tea. "We don't get many visitors," she said with a knowing smile. "Strange," David replied, stirring his drink. "This place is beautiful. I'm surprised it's not on any maps." The woman's expression didn't change. "Some places don't like to be found." David chuckled nervously, assuming it was just small-town folklore. As the day went on, he noticed little things that unsettled him. There were no modern cars, only old-fashioned bicycles. The buildings looked brand new despite their vintage design. The people were warm and welcoming, yet their mannerisms felt rehearsed, like actors in a play they had performed 1,000 times before. Then there was the clock tower in the town square. It stood tall, its hands frozen at 6:47. David asked a shopkeeper about it, but the man only shook his head. "It's always been that way," he said before quickly changing the subject. By late afternoon, David decided to stay the night. The only inn in town, the Crescent Tide, had a single room available, as if they had been expecting him. That's when the real strangeness began. At sunset, the town was bathed in golden light. But as night crept in, Saline Bay felt different. The air became heavy, charged with something unseen. The distant crash of waves grew quieter, muffled, as if the ocean itself were pulling away. From his window, David watched as the streets emptied. The once friendly locals disappeared behind closed doors, their lights flickering out one by one. The air smelled different now, no longer salt and sea breeze, but something dry like dust. Then, at exactly 6:47 p.m., he heard it, a distant, echoing chime from the broken clock tower. David turned away from the window, his heart hammering. He told himself he was imagining things, that the exhaustion of the road was catching up to him. He turned in for the night, trying to ignore the unease curling in his stomach. He woke in the early hours to silence. No wind, no waves, no creaking wood from the inn's old frame. Just an empty, aching stillness. David grabbed his phone. No signal. The battery, which had been at 50% the night before, was now dead. He stepped outside, expecting to see the town blanketed in moonlight. But what he saw instead made his blood run cold. Saline Bay was fading. The streets had become hazy, like a mirage dissolving in the heat. Buildings lost their edges, warping and blurring at the seams. The cafe, where he had shared a conversation with the old woman just hours before, was now nothing but a skeletal outline, its colors draining into the darkness. Panicked, David ran toward the town square, toward the frozen clock tower. As he did, the ground beneath him felt wrong. It no longer had the resistance of sand or pavement. It was soft, shifting, as if he were running across something not entirely real. He reached the clock tower, gripping its cold, unmoving hands. He shouted for help, but there was no one left to hear him. 6:47. The hands never moved, but the chime echoed once more. Then he heard footsteps, slow, deliberate. Turning, David saw a figure standing at the edge of the dissolving town. A woman in old-fashioned clothing, her face eerily familiar. The same woman who had served him tea. "Some places don't like to be found," she whispered, her voice carried by an unfelt wind. David stumbled back, but there was nowhere to go. The town was gone now, swallowed by the void. The sky stretched endlessly above him, no longer a night sky, but a blank, gray nothingness. And then, David gasped awake. The sun was rising. The town was back. The cafe, the shops, the clock tower, exactly as it had been the day before. People strolled about as if nothing had happened. The smell of salt and sun-warmed sand filled the air. Had it been a dream? Heart still racing, he grabbed his backpack and sprinted to his car. But as he reached for his keys, he noticed something in the passenger seat. A cup of tea, still warm. No maps mark the location of Saline Bay. No travel guides recommend its beauty. And maybe that's for the best, because some places aren't meant to be found. And if you ever do find one, never stay past sundown. It was a family trip like any other, the kind filled with sunscreen, sandcastles, and the rhythmic sound of waves rolling onto the shore. The Martinez family had driven down to the coast for a much-needed getaway, a week of sun and sea, away from the stresses of their suburban life. That day, the beach was unusually calm. The sky stretched endless and blue, the tide gentle. No lifeguards were whistling warnings, no panic cries for help. Just the distant laughter of children, the rustling of beach umbrellas, and the soft whisper of the ocean breathing in and out. Mrs. Martinez, a self-proclaimed shutterbug, was capturing every moment. The kids running through the surf, her husband reclining with a book, the golden sunlight casting long shadows over the dunes. It wasn't until later, much later, that they noticed the photo. That evening, as the family sat around their rented beach house, scrolling through the day's pictures, something made Mrs. Martinez pause. At first, it seemed like nothing. A picturesque shot of the ocean, her son standing near the shore, the waves lapping at his ankles. But then, her breath hitched. In the background, just beyond the breakers, was a figure. It wasn't clear, blurred, distorted by the water, but unmistakably human. Arms flailing, mouth open in a silent scream. A frozen moment of terror, as if someone had been drowning. Her stomach clenched. Had someone been in trouble? Had they stood there, oblivious, while a person fought for their life just feet away? She quickly zoomed in, heart pounding. The image grew grainy but clearer. A shape desperate, eyes wide with fear, but something was wrong. The figure seemed out of place. The colors were off, the contrast unnatural. And strangest of all, there had been no commotion, no shouts for help. Nothing. She showed it to her husband, who frowned. There weren't any lifeguards out today, but I don't remember hearing anything. He shook his head. Maybe it's just a trick of the light. But the more they stared, the less it felt like a trick, and the more it felt like a warning. That night, unease settled over Mrs. Martinez like a damp fog. The sound of the waves, once soothing, now felt mocking, as if the ocean itself knew something they didn't. She couldn't shake the feeling, so she did what any mother would. She started digging, checking local news, beach reports, old archives. If someone had drowned there that day, there had to be a record. Nothing. Not just for that day, for years. No recent drownings at that beach. No missing persons. No accidents. It didn't make sense. That image, that face, frozen in agony. It wasn't nothing. The more she searched, the deeper she fell into a terrifying possibility. What if this wasn't a drowning that had just happened, but one that had already happened long ago? Coastal legends whisper to the ocean as something more than just water. Something alive. Some said the sea held onto the souls it took. That sometimes, under the right conditions, when the light hit just right, the past bled through. Mrs. Martinez stumbled upon an old forum post, a chilling entry from nearly a decade prior. A different family, a different trip, but the same beach. The post described a photo, a seemingly normal vacation shot, until they noticed something in the background. A drowning figure, just like hers. It was then that Mrs. Martinez realized the most horrifying part. She looked back at the picture, now trembling. The blurred face, the twisted expression of fear. It wasn't just some random person. It looked familiar. It looked exactly like her own son. She could barely breathe. How was that possible? He was right here, sleeping just a room away. Safe. Alive. But there, frozen in the waves, was his face. Distorted. Drowning. Screaming for help that never came. She deleted the photo immediately. Or at least, she thought she did. But when she checked her phone the next morning, it was back. And this time, in the photo, the figure was closer. The Martinez family left the beach that morning. They never spoke of the photo again. But the ocean, it doesn't forget. And some say, when the tide is just right, when the wind is still and the sky is clear, the sea reveals its secrets. Echoes of the lost. Glimpses of those who never made it back to shore. And if you're not careful, you might be next. The ocean is vast, beautiful, but it holds on to things. Memories, souls, whispers of those it has claimed. What Mrs. Martinez captured in that photo remains a mystery. A trick of the light? A digital glitch? Or a warning of something yet to come? Maybe, just maybe, some drownings never really end. Have you ever captured something unexplainable in a photo? A shadow that wasn't there? A face you don't recognize? Drop your own eerie encounters in the comments below. And remember, the ocean never forgets. Be careful where you point your camera, because sometimes the past is watching. Piers are strange places. Wooden planks stretching out into the unknown, standing on brittle legs above deep, dark waters. For most people, they're a place of leisure, a spot for strolling, fishing, or watching the sunset. But for David Carter, they became a place of nightmares. David had been fishing off the same pier for years. Located in a quiet coastal town, it wasn't a tourist hotspot, but the locals knew it well. Some said the fishing there was the best in the region, but others, the old-timers, warned that the water beneath that pier held things better left alone. David never paid much attention to those warnings until one night in the late summer of 2018. It started with something small, an unsettling feeling that he wasn't alone. He was fishing alone that evening. The only sound, the gentle lapping of waves against the barnacle-covered beams beneath him. The air was heavy with salt, the horizon turning an inky black as the last traces of sunlight faded. Then, the first sign came. The ripples. Not waves, not the normal shift of water beneath a pier, but something deliberate, something huge moving below the surface. The kind of displacement that happens when something large displaces water, not near him, but directly beneath him. Then, his fishing line went dead still. No tugs, no bites, just silence, as if something in the water had made every fish vanish without a trace. David peered down into the black water. That's when he saw it. The reflection of something massive just below the wooden beams. A shape, too large to be a fish, too wrong to be anything he recognized. The next night, David came prepared. He wasn't the type to get scared easily, but what he saw had shaken him. This time, he brought a waterproof camera, the kind divers use, attached to a thick cord. He dropped it slowly into the depths, letting it sink beneath the beams of the pier. The camera drifted downward, its built-in light slicing through the murky water. Nothing at first, just sand, debris, and swaying strands of seaweed. Then movement, a shadow, massive and slow, just at the edge of the light. David's pulse quickened. He adjusted the cord, trying to steer the camera toward the movement. The light flickered against the wooden beams, revealing something wrapped around them. Marks. Long, deep grooves carved into the wood, like something with claws had been gripping it. Then the water shifted. Something was there. Something big. Then two eyes appeared. Not fish eyes. Not the glassy, mindless orbs of a sea creature. These were too large, too deep, too knowing. The pupils contracted. The head tilted just slightly, and then the camera cut to static. David yanked the camera up so fast the cord burned his hands. He stumbled back, his breathing ragged. The footage had cut out, but when he played it back later, only part of it made sense. The water, the beams, the deep scratches, then the eyes. But just before the camera cut off, the footage had captured something more. A glimpse of the creature's face. Not a fish, not a shark, something ancient, something watching him with understanding. A wide, unnatural mouth, barely visible in the murky depths, curling ever so slightly into a smile. David never fished off that pier again. In fact, he left town completely a few months later. When asked about it, he refused to speak. But a friend of his, who had seen the footage, shared one chilling detail. The grooves in the wood, the deep scratches David's camera had captured, they weren't random. They were letters. They spelled his name. What did David see beneath that pier? Was it an unknown sea creature? A predator yet to be classified? Or something far worse? Something intelligent? Something waiting? Throughout history, sailors have spoken of creatures in the deep that are more than just animals. Beings that watch from the darkness, that remember. Could David's encounter be evidence of one of these creatures? And more importantly, why did it know his name? Most piers are built on old wood that has stood for decades, absorbing the whispers of the waves and whatever else lingers beneath. The next time you walk along a lonely pier, listen closely. Watch the water, and if you see ripples without a breeze, if your skin prickles for no reason, don't look down, because something may already be looking up. Sleep tight if you can. 3 friends, Jake, Lena, and Chris, set out for a weekend camping trip on the quiet, desolate shores of a coastal reserve. The kind of place where the sand stretches for miles, untouched by tourists, and the waves hum a low, endless song against the cliffs. They had heard stories, of course, tales of strange happenings in the dunes, but they chalked it up to local superstition, legends designed to scare off city folks like them. The first day passed without incident. They set up camp in a shallow basin between 2 large dunes, their fire crackling under a sky littered with stars. The only unsettling moment came when Lena noticed something odd about the sand. It felt different, almost loose and too smooth, as if it had been sifted through invisible hands. She brushed it off. By midnight, the fire had burned low, and the 3 friends drifted off to sleep. They had no idea that the land beneath them was already shifting. Jake was the first to wake. A cold, unnatural stillness filled the air, and the usual sounds of the ocean felt distant. He sat up and saw something strange. Their footprints from the previous night were gone. Not just covered by wind or water, completely erased. He nudged Chris awake. They both stepped outside their tents, scanning the dunes. Their fire pit, their footprints, even the drag marks from where they pulled their coolers from the truck, all vanished. It was as if no one had ever set foot there. Lena stirred next. As she crawled out of the tent, her face twisted in confusion. Where the hell is our truck? They turned. The vehicle was gone. Not stolen, not driven away, just not there anymore. The 3 friends ran up a dune, their bare feet sinking into the sand. When they reached the top, an icy chill crawled through their spines. Their truck was nearly half buried in the sand, sitting at a slant as if it had been sinking overnight. Panic set in. They sprinted down to the vehicle, clawing at the sand. It made no sense. The tide had never reached this high, and the sand here was dry. How had it swallowed their truck overnight? Chris tried to dig with his hands, but the more he moved, the faster the sand seemed to shift, as if something beneath it was breathing. Then Lena gasped. The tents. They turned to see their campsite from the night before. Their tents and belongings were sinking, disappearing inch by inch into the earth. They rushed back, grabbing at what they could. Chris managed to snatch his backpack, but Lena's sleeping bag was already half submerged, vanishing beneath the soft, shifting surface. It was like quicksand, but drier, more deliberate, as if something was pulling their things under. Jake grabbed a flashlight from his backpack, shining it across the dunes. The sand was shifting, not like waves or wind patterns, but in deliberate, rhythmic pulses. Then he saw them. At the crest of the farthest dune, barely visible in the dim pre-dawn light, shadows stood against the horizon. Tall, unmoving figures. Watching. His voice cracked. "Guys, we're not alone." Lena and Chris turned just in time to see the figures begin to sink into the dunes, as if the sand itself was consuming them. But they weren't struggling. They were letting it happen. A chilling realization settled over them. The sand wasn't just moving. It was alive, and it had taken others before them. "Run!" Chris shouted, and they bolted toward the truck. The sand fought them, their legs sinking deeper with every step. It was as if the ground itself was trying to keep them there, pulling them in inch by inch. Jake reached the driver's side, yanking open the door. The truck groaned as its wheels fought against the sand, the engine sputtering to life. Chris and Lena barely managed to climb in before the ground beneath them collapsed. Their tents, their campsite, everything was gone. Swallowed whole. The truck lurched forward, tires spinning wildly. With one final, desperate push, they managed to break free, speeding off the beach as the dunes behind them seemed to ripple and shift, like a great, unseen creature settling back into place. They never spoke of what happened that night. When they returned to town the next day, they tried to explain what they had seen, but no one believed them. The rangers found no trace of their campsite, no evidence they had ever been there. But when Jake checked his backpack, he found something that hadn't been there before. A handful of smooth, black stones, cool to the touch, and covered in faint, unrecognizable symbols. Some things are not meant to be disturbed. Was this a natural phenomenon? A cursed land? Or something older than time itself, waiting beneath the sand for its next victims? Many beaches hold stories of shifting dunes, of things lost to the earth overnight. Some blame it on the wind, the tide, or the elements. But sometimes the truth is much, much darker. Sleep well tonight, and remember, the sand never forgets. It was late September when David and Lisa decided to take a weekend trip to the coast. They were both drawn to the idea of solitude, the kind of isolation only an off-season beach town could provide. The air was crisp, the sky a dull slate gray, and the ocean roared in the distance. Lisa had found an old hiking trail that led to a deserted lighthouse, perched high on the cliffs overlooking the sea. The lighthouse had long since been decommissioned, but locals still whispered about it, claiming it was haunted. Silly stories, the woman at the general store had said with a dismissive wave of her hand. Just kids trying to scare tourists. But the way she hurried away after saying it made Lisa wonder. The trail was rugged, overgrown in places, and the deeper they walked, the quieter everything became. The chatter of birds faded, the wind died down, and soon, only the crunch of their boots filled the empty air. Lisa was the first to notice it. "Do you hear that?" she asked, stopping mid-step. David frowned. "Hear what?" "Exactly." The absence of sound was unnatural. Even the waves seemed muffled. And then the smell hit them. Salt, but mixed with something else. Something damp. Something old. Then, ahead on the path, a figure emerged. He was tall, lean, and dressed in an old, heavy coat. A fisherman's hat cast his face in shadow. Everything about him looked misplaced, like he had walked straight out of a different time. "Turn back," the man said, his voice rough like the wind. "You shouldn't be here after dark." Lisa and David exchanged uneasy glances. "We're just hiking," David said. "We wanted to see the lighthouse." The man shook his head, stepping closer. His eyes, pale and storm gray, seemed almost translucent. "Not safe," he muttered. "Not at night." The cliffs, the tide, his voice trailed off. He looked suddenly exhausted. Haunted. Lisa, against all logic, felt an urge to comfort him. "Do you work here?" she asked. The man exhaled sharply. "I did." Then, before either of them could respond, he turned and walked away, toward the lighthouse, disappearing over the hill. David let out a breath. "That was weird." Lisa hesitated. I think we should listen to him." But David, ever the skeptic, laughed. "He's just an old guy trying to scare us off. Come on, let's at least check out the lighthouse before we head back." Reluctantly, Lisa followed. But deep in her gut, something felt wrong. The lighthouse stood tall against the dull sky, its paint peeling, its windows dark. The door was ajar, creaking slightly in the wind. David peered inside. No one's lived here in ages. Inside, the air was thick with dust. Furniture covered in sheets. A rotting staircase. Old logbooks stacked in a corner. Lisa ran a finger over one. Its leather cover cracked, the pages yellowed. And then she saw it. A black and white photograph. Her breath caught. The man from the trail stared back at her, his features unmistakable. But the date beneath the photograph made her stomach lurch. 1913. Lisa turned the book toward David, her hands shaking. "That man, he's been dead for over 100 years." A gust of wind slammed the door shut behind them. David cursed, yanking at the handle. Stuck. The room suddenly felt smaller, colder. Then the whisper came, right behind them. "Get out." Lisa whirled around, but the room was empty. David's face drained of color. He had heard it too. With a final yank, the door flew open, sending them stumbling onto the cliffside path. The lighthouse stood silent behind them. Neither spoke as they hurried back toward town, the sky darkening above them. But just before they reached the trailhead, Lisa looked back and froze. High on the cliff, just beside the lighthouse, stood the figure of the keeper, watching them. Still, too still. And then, he was gone. The next day, they asked the locals about the lighthouse. A bartender, pale-faced, told them the truth. The last keeper had died in 1913. He had fallen from the cliffs during a storm while trying to warn travelers about the incoming tide. Some say he was trying to save someone. Others say he was taken by the sea. His body was never found, but the stories remained. Hikers who ignored his warning, who stayed past nightfall, were never seen again. Lisa and David left that same evening, never daring to return. So the next time you find yourself near a lighthouse, alone, with the wind whispering warnings in your ear, listen, because some warnings come from the dead. It was a quiet morning on the Oregon coast when 8-year-old Lily ran ahead of her parents, her tiny feet leaving quick imprints in the damp sand. She loved coming to the beach. She loved the smell of salt in the air, the way the waves crashed like a sleeping giant's breath. But most of all, she loved the tide pools. On this particular day, the sky hung low with heavy clouds, casting an eerie gray over the shoreline. The tide had pulled back further than usual, revealing pools of trapped seawater nestled between jagged rocks. Lily crouched beside one, peering into the shimmering world beneath the surface. Tiny fish darted between strands of swaying green. A starfish clung lazily to a rock. But then, something shifted. The water rippled, distorting her reflection. When it stilled, her own face was staring back, but older. Not much, maybe a year or two. Yet something about it was off. The eyes were wide, fearful. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. She blinked. The reflection returned to normal. Just her. Just the water. Just her imagination. Or so she thought. Over the next few weeks, Lily visited the tide pool every chance she got. At first, nothing strange happened. But then, one afternoon, the reflection changed again. This time, it wasn't just her face, it was her parents too. They stood behind her, looking toward the ocean. Her mother's hand was gripping her father's arm, her expression twisted in horror. But when Lily turned around, her parents were chatting a few feet away, completely unaware. A chill crawled up her spine. She backed away from the pool, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed, that something had seen her. She told her parents about the tide pool, about what she saw. They laughed it off, told her it was just a trick of the light, that water could play strange games with reflections. But Lily knew what she saw, and she knew it was something more. A week later, she returned. The sky was darker that day, the waves churning more violently than usual. She wasn't supposed to be near the rocks, but the tide pool was calling to her. She felt it deep in her chest, an unshakable pull, like a whisper only she could hear. When she looked into the water this time, her breath hitched. It was her again, but now she was drenched, soaked to the bone, her hair plastered to her face, and her lips were blue. She was drowning. Her reflection clawed at the water, her mouth open in a scream Lily couldn't hear. And then, the worst part, she saw something behind her. A dark figure standing at the edge of the rocks, just beyond the water's reach. Her own reflection was struggling, reaching, and the figure just watched. Lily stumbled back, her heart hammering. But when she turned, there was no one behind her. She ran to her parents, sobbing, begging them to leave. They were confused, but they saw the terror in her eyes. That was enough. They packed up and left the beach immediately. That night, a violent storm rolled in. The winds howled like something alive, and the sea clawed hungrily at the shore. By morning, the tide pool was gone, swallowed by the rising waves. And so was a girl from town. She had gone missing the night before, last seen near the rocks, where the tide pool once was, where Lily had seen herself drowning. What did Lily really see in that tide pool? Was it just an eerie coincidence? Or did the water show her a future she narrowly escaped? And what of the dark figure? A warning? Or something worse? The ocean has always held mysteries. Some we can explain. Others remain beyond our understanding. Perhaps the tide pool was never just a pool at all. Perhaps it was a window, one that should have never been looked through. Some say the girl who vanished was never found. Others whisper that her body washed up miles away, her face frozen in an expression of terror. But one thing remains certain. Lily never went back to the beach again, and neither should we ignore the things we glimpse in the corner of our vision. because sometimes the reflection isn't just looking back. Sometimes it's watching. It started with a handful of strange reports. A man walking along the shore in the early hours of the morning when he noticed something odd. The crash of the waves had faded. The ever-present screech of gulls had disappeared. Even the soft crunch of his own footsteps in the sand had gone utterly silent. A cold dread settled in his stomach as he turned toward the water. Without realizing it, he had walked knee-deep into the ocean. It was as if something had called him without making a sound. Terrified, he snapped back to reality and stumbled out of the water, gasping for breath as the world returned to normal. The waves roared back to life. The wind howled. The seagulls shrieked overhead. He told himself it was exhaustion, perhaps a momentary blackout. But the fear gnawed at him. He wasn't the only one. Over the next few months, similar stories emerged. A woman jogging along the boardwalk at sunset noticed everything had gone eerily still. No sound, no movement. It was as if the world had hit pause. She barely registered her feet carrying her toward the waves until the frigid water surged around her ankles. A shrill scream cut through the silence, her own. The spell shattered, and the sounds of the ocean crashed back into reality. She fled without looking back. A group of tourists, laughing and taking pictures, suddenly found themselves wading into the surf without remembering how they got there. One of them claimed she felt something watching her, not with eyes, but with presence, as if something in the water had noticed her before she even stepped into the tide. What was causing this eerie phenomenon? Scientists blamed auditory masking, a rare psychological occurrence where the brain suppresses background noise, creating an illusion of total silence. Others suggested sleep deprivation, heat exhaustion, or deep meditation states. But the locals, they knew better. They called it the siren's silent song. The legend dates back centuries, long before tourism touched the shores. Sailors once spoke of a presence in the waves, something different from the traditional sirens of myth. Unlike the creatures who lured men with beautiful songs, this entity did not need to sing. It listened, and in that listening, it created silence so deep, so absolute, that the mind lost its grip on reality. Victims would step into the ocean, drawn not by desire, but by an absence, an unsettling void that pulled them forward like a whispered command. Some vanished completely, their bodies never recovered. Others were found washed up days later, their expressions frozen in an unnatural state of calm, as if they had gone willingly. The elders of the town knew the signs. If the beach ever grew too quiet, if the wind suddenly died and the waves refused to crash, you turn around. You walked away, and you never looked back. One of the most chilling accounts happened just last year. A couple visiting the coast for their honeymoon took an evening stroll by the water. The night was beautiful, the moonlight reflecting off the waves. They walked hand in hand, listening to the rhythmic pulse of the sea. And then nothing. The silence hit them all at once, thick and suffocating. The man described feeling lightheaded, as if something was pressing down on his skull. His wife's grip loosened. When he turned to her, she was already moving toward the waves, her expression blank, her feet sinking into the wet sand. He shouted her name, but no sound escaped his throat. He reached out, trying to pull her back, but her body felt strangely weightless, as if something was already claiming her. Then, the silence shattered. A wave slammed against them, knocking them both onto the shore. The world roared back to life. The woman gasped, blinking rapidly, as if waking from a deep sleep. She didn't remember anything past the first few seconds of silence. They left the beach that night and never returned. So, what could be behind the siren's silent song? Is it simply a rare psychological phenomenon, a strange auditory trick of the ocean, or something far more sinister? There are theories. Some paranormal investigators believe this is a cognitive anomaly, an entity that doesn't need sound to control its victims but rather a void of sound. The human brain is conditioned to hear the ocean, to feel the wind, to sense the background hum of life. When those things disappear, the mind panics, seeking something to fill the void. And in that panic, something else takes hold. Others believe it is an ancient force, older than humanity, lurking beneath the tides. Not a siren in the traditional sense, but a predator of consciousness, one that does not hunt with teeth or claws, but with absence itself. Whether you believe in the supernatural or not, the reports remain. The silence persists. The victims always describe the same thing: the sound of nothing, the feeling of being watched, and the gentle pull of the tide beneath their feet. So if you ever find yourself standing on a deserted shore and the waves go quiet, if the wind dies and your own heartbeat is the only thing you hear, do not move, do not listen, and above all, do not step into the water.